The chime of the doorbell cut through the evening quiet like a shard of glass. For a moment I stood perfectly still in the hallway of my suburban Bellevue home, the scent of rain from the damp Washington air mixing with the stale smell of anxiety and reheated coffee. Every unexpected sound sent a jolt through my system, a fresh wave of panic that another bill collector had decided a personal visit was in order. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the symphony of my unraveling life. I looked from the pile of unopened, red-stamped envelopes on the console table to the closed door, as if I could will whoever was on the other side to simply disappear. But the chime came again, patient, insistent. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I smoothed down my cream-colored linen shirt, a futile gesture of composure. I opened the door just a crack at first, then wider, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The warm, golden light from my hallway spilled out onto the porch, illuminating a scene so bizarre, so out of place, that my mind struggled to process it. A man stood there, tall and framed by the deepening twilight blue. He wore a tailored suit, so dark it seemed to drink the last of the day's light, a stark silhouette against the soft grays of the evening. His face was sharp, impassive, with eyes the color of a stormy sea just before a squall. There was a stillness about him, a profound quiet that felt both immensely powerful and deeply, achingly hollow. But it wasn't just him. Peeking out from behind his leg was a little girl no older than my own son, clutching a worn brown teddy bear to her chest as if it were a shield. Her eyes, wide and solemn, mirrored her father's, watching me with a silent, unnerving intensity. My breath caught in my throat. I stared from his impossibly calm face to the guarded gaze of his daughter. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. His voice, when it came, was a low, steady baritone, carrying no hint of a joke, no trace of irony. "I was told you need a CEO," he said. The words hung in the air between us, absurd, precise, and utterly devastating. If you've ever felt that impossible pressure in your chest, that feeling of the entire world resting on your shoulders as you stand on the brink of collapse, then you know the silence that followed. It's a silence so heavy, it has its own gravity. Let me know you understand by hitting that like button, because in that moment I felt completely and utterly alone. But to understand how a man who looked like he owned half of Seattle could end up on my doorstep offering a solution to a problem I hadn't even spoken aloud, you have to understand the 182 days that came before. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime. 6 months since the world had ended. My world, at least. It had ended on a Tuesday with a phone call from a state trooper and a string of words: "Accident. Icy roads. We're so sorry." That had dissolved the foundations of my life into dust. Mark was gone. My Mark. The man whose laughter had been the soundtrack to my entire adult life. The brilliant, kind, and hopelessly optimistic architect who believed buildings could have souls. He had left behind a gaping hole in the universe, a 7-year-old son named Leo, who still asked when Daddy was coming home from his long trip, and a small, heartfelt architectural firm that was now my burden to bear. Vance Designs. It had been his dream, his third child. He'd built it from nothing, pouring every ounce of his passion into creating sustainable, community-focused spaces. He designed parks for low-income neighborhoods, community centers that felt like cathedrals of hope, and homes that worked with the environment, not against it. He believed in architecture as a form of social good, a way to build a better world, one thoughtful design at a time. The firm was his legacy, and for the last 6 months I had been running it straight into the ground. I wasn't an architect. My background was in art history, a degree that had prepared me for curating museum exhibits, not for negotiating with contractors, balancing payroll, or deciphering complex zoning regulations. I was an admiral who didn't know how to sail, captaining a ship that was taking on water faster than I could bail. In the first few weeks, I operated on pure adrenaline and grief-fueled denial. I sat in Mark's chair, his favorite coffee mug still on the desk, and tried to channel him. I tried to hear his voice in the quiet office, to guess what he would do. But Mark's genius was intuitive, a blend of artistry and engineering that I couldn't begin to replicate. The clients, once patient and sympathetic, were growing restless. Deadlines were being missed. Budgets were spiraling out of control. Mark had been the heart and soul of the operation. Without him, it was just a collection of drafting tables and unpaid invoices. The bank had started calling 2 months ago. At first, the calls were polite, gentle inquiries from a loan officer who knew our story. Now they were formal, clipped warnings from the foreclosure department. The letters had escalated from gentle reminders to bold, terrifying notices that I shoved, unopened, into a drawer. Each one felt like a personal failure, another shovelful of dirt on the coffin of my husband's dream. My days became a blur of barely controlled chaos. I'd wake up before dawn, the weight of it all settling on my chest before my eyes were even fully open. I'd make Leo breakfast, plastering a bright, false smile on my face as I packed his lunch, my hands trembling slightly. His laughter was the only thing that kept me tethered to the present. He was a beautiful, boisterous boy, with Mark's unruly brown hair and my eyes. He was also heartbroken, a little boy navigating a world that had suddenly lost its brightest star. He'd taken to building elaborate Lego towers, intricate structures that reached for the ceiling, only to smash them to pieces in a fit of frustration he couldn't articulate. I saw his pain, a mirror of my own, and it was my sole mission to protect him from the cracks that were forming in our world, the financial abyss we were teetering on the edge of. After dropping him at school, I would drive to the small office in Fremont, the trendy Seattle neighborhood, feeling a world away from my reality. I'd spend 8, 10, 12 hours trying to make sense of a business I didn't understand, surrounded by the ghosts of Mark's half-finished projects. His pencil sketches were still pinned to the corkboard, his handwriting on the whiteboards, a constant, painful reminder of everything I had lost. The worst project, the one that haunted me the most, was his last one, the Northgate Community Center. It was a pro bono project, a promise he had made to an underserved neighborhood. He'd designed a beautiful, light-filled space with a community garden, a daycare, and a small library. It was his masterpiece of compassion, and we were out of money. The contractors were threatening to walk. The suppliers had put a hold on our account, and the community that had been so full of hope was now watching their dream wither on the vine. It was this project, more than any other, that represented my failure. Letting the firm go under was one thing. It was a business. But letting this promise die, that felt like betraying Mark himself. I'd started selling things. First, Mark's watch, a beautiful timepiece he'd loved. Then some of my own jewelry, pieces my grandmother had left me. The money was a temporary patch on a gaping wound, gone almost as soon as it hit the bank account. I was drowning, slowly and quietly, in a sea of debt and grief, putting on a brave face for my son, while inwardly screaming for a lifeline. That was my life. A desperate, exhausting tightrope walk over a canyon of failure. And then, on a Tuesday evening, just like the one when my life had first fallen apart, the doorbell rang. It brought me back to the porch, to the cool evening air, the smell of wet earth, and the impossible man standing before me. His statement still hung in the air, a perfectly weighted object of immense strangeness. "I was told you need a CEO." My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Was this a prank? A mistake? Had he come to the wrong house? But his eyes, steady and intense, told me this was no mistake. My gaze drifted again to the little girl. She hadn't moved. She was a tiny statue of silent observation, her small hand clutching her father's trouser leg. I saw the vulnerability in her posture, a stark contrast to the man's unshakable composure. Who brings their child to a business proposition on a stranger's doorstep at dusk? The absurdity of it all finally broke my paralysis. I found my voice, though it came out as a weak, raspy whisper. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head slightly. "I think you have the wrong house." The man's expression didn't change, not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of concession. He simply held my gaze, his stormy eyes seeming to see right through the flimsy wall of my denial, into the chaotic, terrified heart of my life. "Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice still that same impossibly steady baritone. "Widow of Mark Vance, current proprietor of Vance Designs, a firm located at 724 North 34th Street in Fremont. A firm that is, by my calculations, approximately 3 weeks from total insolvency. Am I at the wrong house?" Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing my composure. He knew my name, he knew Mark's name, he knew about the firm, he knew somehow the exact, terrifying timeline that haunted my every waking moment. The blood drained from my face and the porch seemed to sway beneath my feet. My hand, still on the doorknob, tightened until my knuckles were white. This wasn't a mistake. This was an ambush. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, the question a thread of sound in the thick evening air. He ignored it. Instead, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward the interior of my home. "May we come in? My daughter is getting cold." It was only then that I noticed the little girl, Maya, shiver, pulling the collar of her small peacoat tighter around her neck. Her silent presence was a strategic masterstroke. It disarmed me, shifted the encounter from a hostile business intrusion to a matter of basic human decency. You don't leave a child shivering on your doorstep, no matter how menacing her father is. With a feeling of profound surrender, as if I were opening the gates to a Trojan horse, I stepped back and pulled the door open wider. He moved past me into the warmth of my house with a fluid, economic grace that spoke of boardrooms and unquestioned authority. He didn't look at the mess. Leo's Lego creations scattered across the rug like the ruins of a miniature civilization, the stack of unopened mail on the table, the general air of a life being lived on the edge of collapse. His focus was absolute. He guided his daughter to the armchair by the fireplace, the one where Mark used to read, and helped her out of her coat. She sat down, placing her worn teddy bear carefully on her lap, her wide eyes taking in the room with a silent, watchful curiosity. He then turned back to me, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He looked like a general surveying a battlefield he already knew he had won. "My name is Julian Croft," he said. The name landed in the room with a physical weight. Julian Croft. Of course, I'd seen that face on the covers of Forbes and Wired, the tech titan, the ruthless innovator who had built a digital empire, a man famous for his foresight, his strategic brilliance, and his complete lack of sentimentality in business. He was a legend in Seattle, a modern-day Midas who turned code into gold. He was also the last person on earth I would ever expect to see in my cluttered, grief-stricken living room. "And as I said," he continued, his voice pulling me back from my shock, "I understand you're in need of a CEO. We're not hiring," I stammered, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "You're not in a position to hire anyone," he corrected, without a trace of cruelty. It was a simple statement of fact. "But your husband built something with a strong ethical core, a valuable brand identity, however poorly monetized. It would be a shame to let it be dismantled and sold for parts by the bank." He knew everything. The thought was terrifying. How could he possibly know the intimate details of my failure? "I'm taking a sabbatical," he explained, his tone maddeningly neutral. "I find myself in need of a project, a challenge. Consider me an investment. I will assume the role of CEO, stabilize the company's finances, and restructure its business model for profitability. In return, I will take a controlling 51% stake in the firm." I stared at him, my mind reeling. 51%. He wanted to take control of Mark's company. He wanted to own my husband's legacy. The initial shock began to curdle into a hot, protective anger. "No," I said, my voice firmer now. "Absolutely not. This firm was my husband's life. It's all my son and I have left of him. I'm not just going to hand it over to you." "Mrs. Vance," he said, and for the first time his gaze softened, just a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something I couldn't read. "With all due respect, you are not handing it over to me. You are handing it over to the bank. They will be far less interested in preserving your husband's vision than I am. I am offering you a chance to save it, the only chance you have." His logic was a cold, hard cage, and I was rattling its bars. He was right. Every word he said was the undeniable, brutal truth. My pride, my anger, my grief, none of it mattered in the face of the foreclosure notices sitting on the table. Just then, I heard the pitter-patter of small feet. Leo appeared in the doorway to the hall, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He must have woken up from his nap on the sofa. "Mommy?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Who's that?" His eyes fell on Maya, who was still sitting silently in the armchair. He paused, his head tilted. Maya looked back at him, her expression unchanging. For a long moment, the two children just stared at each other, communicating in a silent language of childhood that adults could no longer speak. Leo walked slowly over to the chair. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blue Lego spaceman. He held it out to her. Maya looked at the toy, then up at her father, who gave another one of his infinitesimal nods. She reached out a small hand and took the spaceman, her tiny fingers closing around it. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Watching them, something inside me shifted. A hairline crack appeared in the wall of my resistance. This man, Julian Croft, was not just a corporate predator. He was a father. A father to a quiet, solemn little girl who carried a teddy bear and sat patiently in a stranger's house. For a brief second, I saw past the billionaire and saw a man navigating his own fractured world, just as I was. We were two parents from two different universes, both trying to build a life for our children from the wreckage of the past. The silence in the room was broken by Julian's voice, softer this time. "A trial period," he proposed. "1 month. I will work without salary. I will use my own capital to stabilize the firm's immediate debts. If at the end of 30 days you don't believe I am honoring the core principles of what your husband built, I will walk away. You will be in a far better financial position than you are now with no further obligation to me." It was an offer I couldn't refuse. It was a lifeline, a terrifying, mysterious, and possibly poisonous lifeline, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Leo, now showing Maya how the spaceman's helmet could come off. I looked at the pile of bills. I looked at the ghost of my husband that seemed to linger in every corner of the house. Saving his dream, his legacy. Wasn't that my most important duty? "Okay," I whispered, the word feeling like a betrayal and a prayer all at once. 1 month. Julian Croft started the next day. He arrived at the office at precisely 7 o'clock in the morning, with Maya in tow. The office, my chaotic sanctuary of grief, felt instantly different with his presence in it. He moved with a quiet purpose that made everyone else seem clumsy and slow. He didn't raise his voice or give grand speeches. He simply observed, assessed, and rearranged reality. First, he established a small corner for Maya, setting up a portable drawing easel, a stack of books, and a small rug. She settled in as if it were the most natural thing in the world, her quiet presence a silent anchor in the storm of his arrival. Then, he turned his attention to the business. He didn't ask me for a tour. He simply walked into my office, Mark's office, and sat down not in the guest chair but behind the desk. He turned on the computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with unnerving speed, pulling up financial records I didn't even know how to access. He spent the first 2 hours in complete silence, his eyes scanning spreadsheets and profit and loss statements. The only sound was the quiet clicking of the keys. I stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Finally, he looked up at me. "The workflow is inefficient, the overhead is unsustainable, and your project bids are based more on optimism than on realistic material costs," he stated. "But the core design philosophy is strong. There's a marketable brand here. It's just buried under 6 months of reactive emotional decision-making." The words were a slap in the face, but they were also true. I had been making decisions with my heart, not my head, trying to preserve the memory of Mark's kindness in every contract. Julian saw passion projects as liabilities. I saw them as the soul of the company. The first point of friction was immediate and intense. His cursor hovered over a line item on the screen. "The Northgate Community Center," he said. "This project is a financial black hole. We're losing nearly $200,000 on it, with no prospect of return. We cut it. Today. We inform the clients we are withdrawing due to financial restructuring." "No," I said, stepping forward. The word came out sharp, unyielding. "We can't. That was Mark's final promise. The community is counting on us." Julian's gaze was unwavering. "A promise from a man who is no longer here to fulfill it is not a binding contract. It's a sentiment. And sentiment is a luxury this firm cannot afford. We are a business, Mrs. Vance, not a charity. The first step to saving this company is to stop the bleeding." "You don't understand," I pleaded, my voice rising. "That center isn't about money. It's about hope. It's about everything Mark believed in. If we abandon that, then what are we even saving?" "We are saving the jobs of your 12 employees," he replied calmly. "We are saving the roof over your son's head. We are saving the company so that it can exist to make 100 more promises it can actually keep. Your husband's intentions were noble, but his business acumen was romantic. My job is not to be romantic, it's to be realistic." We stood there, locked in a battle of wills, the ghost of my husband between us. It was the heart versus the bottom line, grief versus logic, love versus mathematics. And as I looked into his cold, calculating eyes, I felt a profound sense of dread. I had invited a stranger in to save my husband's legacy, but I was beginning to fear he was here to systematically erase it, one logical, ruthless decision at a time. I held his gaze. My own defiance a fragile shield against the cold certainty in his eyes. "It's not just a sentiment," I insisted, my voice trembling with a conviction I didn't feel. "It's the foundation of this company. Mark built this firm to do good, not just to make money. If you take that away, you're not saving Vance Designs. You're just creating another hollow corporation with its name." For a long moment he was silent. I expected him to counter with another irrefutable piece of logic, another cold calculation that would dismantle my argument. Instead, he walked over to the large drafting table where the blueprints for the Northgate Center were spread out, a sea of white lines on a vast blue background. He leaned over it, his hands braced on the edges, and studied Mark's design. He was quiet for so long that I could hear the faint hum of the server in the next room and the soft scratching of Maya's colored pencil on paper from her corner. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The hard executive edge was gone, replaced by something analytical, almost academic. "The design is brilliant," he said, his finger tracing the curve of the proposed rooftop garden. "Passive solar reclaimed materials, rainwater harvesting. The integration is seamless. Your husband wasn't just a romantic, Mrs. Vance. He was a visionary. But a vision without a viable financial framework is just a hallucination." He turned to face me. "I did not say we should abandon the vision. I said we should cut our losses on this version of it. The two are not the same thing." He picked up a red pen from the table. My entire body tensed, as if he were about to draw a weapon. He didn't deface the blueprint. Instead, he began to sketch on a blank notepad next to it, his movements quick and precise. "We are approaching this from the wrong angle," he said, not looking up. "We're trying to fund a charity project with the resources of a failing for-profit business. It's impossible. We need to reframe the project itself." For the next hour, he laid out a strategy so audacious and yet so logical that it left me breathless. He spoke of turning the community center into a hybrid entity. He would leverage his own contacts to bring in corporate sponsors, not as donors, but as partners. A local tech giant could sponsor the computer lab in exchange for naming rights. A major grocery chain could fund the community garden as part of its corporate sustainability initiative. He outlined a plan to renegotiate every single supplier contract, using the threat of his much larger corporate accounts as leverage. He redesigned the construction phases, breaking them into smaller, fundable milestones. He wasn't killing the project. He was performing open-heart surgery on it, cutting away the diseased financial tissue to save the living, beating core. "Your husband wanted to build a center for the community," he concluded, setting the pen down. "I am proposing a way to do that, and ensure it has the funding to operate for the next 20 years. The soul of the project remains. The method of its birth is simply more pragmatic." I was speechless. A part of me, the part that was still fiercely loyal to Mark's idealistic methods, wanted to hate it. Naming rights and corporate logos felt like a desecration of Mark's pure vision. But the other part of me, the pragmatic part that had been staring into the abyss of foreclosure, knew he was right. He had found a third way, a path I had been too blinded by grief and fear to see. He hadn't destroyed Mark's dream. In his own cold, calculating way, he had just made it possible. I started, but the words wouldn't come. I simply nodded. A small, jerky movement that felt like a monumental concession, a truce. In the weeks that followed, a strange and fragile ecosystem developed in the office. The air was still thick with the tension between my worldview and Julian's, but it was now a productive tension. He was a force of nature, streamlining every process, cutting every inefficiency, and negotiating with a ruthlessness that was both terrifying and mesmerizing to watch. He secured the funding for the Northgate project within 10 days. The very contractors who had been threatening to sue me were now deferential and eager to work, their invoices paid in full from an account I didn't recognize. He was saving us. There was no other word for it. Yet the man himself remained a complete enigma. He worked 18-hour days, fueled by a relentless energy that seemed to come from a place beyond caffeine. He never spoke of a life outside the office, never mentioned friends, and deflected any personal questions with an unnerving skill. The only crack in his armor was Maya. She was his shadow, his silent, watchful moon. Every day she would sit in her corner, reading books far beyond her years, or drawing intricate, detailed pictures of buildings and forests. She rarely spoke, but her presence softened the hard edges of the office, a quiet reminder that her formidable father was, in fact, human. The real bridge between our two worlds was built by our children. Leo, who had been withdrawn and prone to fits of frustrated anger since Mark's death, was fascinated by the quiet girl in the corner. He started bringing his Lego bin to the office, setting up his construction site near her drawing easel. At first, they worked in parallel silence. Then slowly they began to interact. It wasn't through words. Leo would be building a tower and it would start to wobble. Maya, without looking up from her book, would reach out and hand him the exact support piece he needed. Leo, in turn, would build small Lego animals and leave them by her easel, a silent offering. They had found their own language, a grammar of shared loss and quiet companionship that none of the adults could penetrate. One late afternoon, I looked up from my desk to see them in Maya's corner. Leo was whispering something to her, his head close to hers. He was pointing at a photograph on my desk, a picture of me, Mark, and a much younger Leo, all laughing on a beach. Maya looked at the picture, then back at Leo, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw her face change. A profound, empathetic sadness washed over her features. She reached out her small hand and gently patted Leo's arm. It was a gesture of such simple, pure comfort that it brought a lump to my throat. Julian stood in the doorway of his office, watching them. The mask of the impassive CEO was gone. In its place was a look of such deep, aching loneliness that it felt like I was intruding on a private grief. He seemed to see in our children's connection everything that was missing from his own life. He caught my eye, and for a fleeting second, the wall between us vanished. He looked away quickly, his composure snapping back into place, but the image of his unguarded face stayed with me. Who was this man who commanded empires but looked like he had lost the world? The fragile peace was shattered by a phone call from Mark's father. Eleanor, Robert Vance's voice was cold, stripped of the warmth I had known for 15 years. Your mother and I need to talk to you. We've been hearing things. My stomach clenched. What kind of things, Robert? Things about this man you've brought in, this Croft. People are saying you've handed your husband's company over to a corporate shark, that you're letting him destroy everything Mark built. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. He's helping, he's saving the firm. Is that what he told you? Robert's laugh was a bitter, ugly sound. A man like Julian Croft doesn't help, Eleanor. He acquires, he consumes. We will not stand by and watch you allow a predator to circle our son's legacy. We've spoken to our lawyers. We are prepared to take legal action to protect the company's assets from your mismanagement. The line went dead, but the threat echoed in my ears. The people who I thought were my family, my support system, were now my adversaries. A week later, the official letter arrived from their lawyers. It was a brutal document, filled with legal jargon that all translated to one simple message. We believe you are incompetent, and we believe Julian Croft is an opportunist taking advantage of a grieving widow. They were demanding a full audit, a review of my executive authority, and they were petitioning the court to appoint a conservator to oversee the firm, to protect it from me. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled into Julian's office, the letter trembling in my hand. They're trying to take the company, I whispered, sinking into the chair opposite his desk. He took the letter from me and read it, his expression unreadable. I expected him to be angry, to see this as a complication to his investment. Instead, he folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk. This is not unexpected, he said calmly. Grief manifests in many ways. For your in-laws, it is manifesting as a need for control. They feel powerless, so they are lashing out at the nearest target. But they're my family, I cried, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over. They think you're a monster, and they think I'm a fool. What they think is irrelevant, he said, his voice still infuriatingly level. What matters is the legal and financial reality. Their case is built on emotion, not on fact. The fact is, this firm was on a trajectory to bankruptcy 3 weeks ago. Today its debts are cleared, its largest project is fully funded, and its quarterly projections are positive for the first time in a year. Their petition will fail. His confidence was absolute, a granite wall against my tidal wave of panic. But as I looked at him, the calm, strategic genius who had an answer for everything, my in-laws' words wormed their way back into my mind. A man like Julian Croft doesn't help. Why was he doing this? Why would a man whose time was worth millions of dollars an hour dedicate himself to saving a tiny, failing architectural firm in the suburbs? It didn't make sense. The mystery of his arrival, once a strange curiosity, now felt like a sinister, gaping hole in the center of my life. The pressure mounted in the days that followed. The legal battle was a constant, draining presence. My in-laws refused to speak to me directly, communicating only through their lawyers. I felt utterly alone, caught between my husband's family and a man I barely knew, trusting him only because I had no other choice. One night I couldn't sleep. The question, "Why is he here?" was a relentless drumbeat in my head. I got out of bed, dressed, and drove to the office. The building was dark and silent, a ghost of its daytime efficiency. I used my key to let myself in, needing to be surrounded by Mark's presence, to find some clarity in the quiet. I walked into his old office, now Julian's, and sat down in the chair where I had once felt so lost. Now it felt like the eye of a storm. My gaze fell upon a row of archival boxes on a high shelf, boxes I hadn't touched since Mark's death. They were filled with his old files, his journals, his past. I needed an answer. I needed something that made sense of the impossible reality I was living in. With a surge of desperate resolve, I stood on a chair and pulled down the heaviest box, the one marked simply, Legacy. Dust motes danced in the moonlight, slanting through the window as I placed it on the desk and lifted the lid. Inside was a life's work in paper, old sketchbooks filled with impossible buildings, journals filled with his elegant script, and files from projects long since completed. I dug through them, my fingers searching for a clue, a key, anything that would unlock the mystery of Julian Croft. And then I saw it. Tucked at the very bottom, beneath a folder of his university thesis work, was a single, sealed envelope. It was thick, made of expensive stationery. My heart stopped. Written across the front in my husband's familiar handwriting were two words that would change everything. For Julian. The air in the silent office grew heavy, thick with the weight of the past. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the elegant script of Julian's name. It was Mark's handwriting, unmistakable and alive, a ghost reaching out from the page. How was this possible? I had packed these boxes myself in a fog of grief, my hands moving automatically while my mind was a million miles away. I had never noticed this. A letter from my husband to the man who now sat in his chair, a man Mark had never once mentioned in the 15 years I'd known him. My first instinct was a fierce, protective privacy. This was a private correspondence not meant for my eyes. But the questions, the doubts, the terrifying uncertainty of the past month overwhelmed any sense of propriety. My in-laws' accusations echoed in my mind. He's a predator. He's taking advantage of you. I had to know. I had to understand the connection that had brought this enigmatic titan to my suburban doorstep. With a sharp intake of breath, I broke the seal. The letter was dated just 3 weeks before Mark's accident. His handwriting, usually so fluid and confident, was slightly shaky, the words of a man facing his own mortality. He had known. The doctors had told him the tumor was inoperable, that he had months, maybe only weeks. He had kept it from me, from everyone, determined to spare us the pain of a slow, agonizing decline. The thought was a fresh stab of grief, but I pushed it down, forcing my eyes to focus on the words. Julian. The letter began, and the name itself was a shock. No formal greeting, just the familiar address of a long-lost friend. If you are reading this, it means I've finally run out of time. I imagine you're surprised to hear from me after all these years. 20 of them, isn't it? A lifetime. I'm sure you're even more surprised that I've followed your career, every magazine cover, every keynote speech. I've watched you build an empire from the ground up, just like we always planned. You did it, old friend. You conquered the world. My mind struggled to form a picture. Julian and Mark, friends, college roommates, the next paragraph revealed. Best friends, inseparable, two brilliant, ambitious young men who were going to change the world together. They had started their first company in a dorm room, a fledgling design firm that blended Mark's architectural vision with Julian's nascent genius for business strategy. They had a plan, a shared dream that was supposed to last a lifetime. I still think about that night in the lab, Mark had written, the night it all fell apart. I think about it more than I should. We were both so young, so arrogant. We both thought we were right. Maybe we both were, but my pride, my damned stupid pride, and it cost me my best friend. I let you walk away. and I have regretted it every single day for the last 20 years. I was wrong, Julian. I should have trusted you. I should have fought for you, not against you. The letter didn't specify the details of their falling out, mentioning only a project and a woman, a classic tragic combination that had shattered their bond. A profound sense of sorrow washed over me, a grief for a friendship I never knew existed, for a wound my husband had carried in silence for 2 decades. He had followed Julian's meteoric rise, not with envy, but with a quiet, distant pride mixed with the deep ache of regret. "I see your life from a distance," the letter continued, and the words became almost painfully intimate. "I see the glass towers and the global headquarters. I see the billions in valuation. But I also see the emptiness in your eyes on those magazine covers. I see the isolation. You built an empire, Julian, but you forgot to build a home. I did the opposite. I built a home. A beautiful, messy, wonderful home with the most incredible woman I have ever known, Eleanor, and my son, Leo. They are my world. They are my legacy. And now I'm leaving them. I'm leaving my home unprotected." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the words. I could feel Mark's presence in the room, his love, his fear, his desperate, brilliant mind working right up until the very end. "That's why I'm writing to you. This is my last and most audacious design. A Hail Mary pass from the great beyond. When I'm gone, Eleanor is going to be in trouble. The firm's Vance Designs. It's my heart and soul, but I never had your head for the business side of things. It's vulnerable. She's going to need a CEO. She has the heart, Julian. God, does she have the heart. But she needs a strategist. She needs you. But this isn't just about her. It's about you too. What you really need, old friend, is not another company to conquer. You need a family. You need a home. So here is my dying wish. My final, crazy proposition. Go to her. Don't tell her about this letter, not at first. Don't tell her who you are. Let her see you. Let her make her own judgment. She won't trust you if she thinks you're there out of pity or obligation. Show her that you can save the firm, but let her see the man I once knew, not the titan the world sees. Maybe, just maybe, you can save each other. It's a merger, Julian. Not of companies, but of broken lives. I'm asking you to protect my legacy, and I'm offering you a chance to build your own. Your friend, always, Mark. I lowered the letter, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it. It all clicked into place. The absurd, precise statement on my porch. I was told you need a CEO. It wasn't a bizarre proposition. It was the fulfillment of a promise. He wasn't a predator. He wasn't an opportunist. He was a man honoring the last wish of his oldest friend. He wasn't there for the 51%. He was there because Mark had asked him to be. The weight of his quiet, relentless work over the past month, his patience with my hostility, his unwavering focus, it was all cast in a new light. It wasn't business. It was a sacred duty, a penance, a final act of love for a friend he had lost twice. I sat there in the dark, the letter in my lap, and wept. I wept for my husband's silent pain, for Julian's profound loneliness, and for the beautiful, heartbreaking architecture of a plan set in motion by a dying man. The next morning I walked into the office with a newfound sense of clarity. The fear and suspicion that had clouded my judgment were gone, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. I found Julian in his office, already on a conference call, his voice the familiar, commanding baritone. I stood in the doorway and waited. He saw me, and something in my expression must have signaled the urgency of the moment, because he ended the call abruptly. "What is it?" he asked, his eyes scanning my face. I didn't say a word. I simply walked to his desk and placed the letter between us. He stared at it, then at me. His face, usually an impassive mask, became utterly still. He didn't need to ask where I'd found it. He picked it up, his movements slow, deliberate. As he read, I watched 20 years of carefully constructed control crumble. The mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The powerful CEO vanished, and in his place was a man racked with a grief so profound it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. His shoulders slumped. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time I'd ever seen. A single, ragged breath escaped his lips. When he finally looked up at me, his stormy eyes were glistening with unshed tears. The titan was gone. Only the man remained. "I'm sorry," I said softly. I shouldn't have read it. No, he rasped, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. You had every right. He leaned back in his chair, the letter clutched in his hand like a holy relic. He was the most brilliant person I ever knew, he said, his gaze distant, lost in a 20-year-old memory. He saw the world in a way no one else did. He saw beauty in everything. I only saw angles, opportunities, weaknesses. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless regret. I should have been there, Eleanor. When he got sick, I should have been there for him, but I was a concept, not a person. My wife, she told me that once. She said she couldn't live with a man who was more a corporate logo than a husband. It was the first time he had ever mentioned a wife. The confession hung in the air, raw and exposed. She left years ago, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. Took everything except Maya. Said she was the only real thing I had ever created. She was right. That was the source of the emptiness I had seen in his eyes, the loneliness that clung to him like a shadow. He had conquered the world and lost everything that mattered in the process. We sat in a shared silence, two strangers bound by the love and legacy of the same man. The gulf between us, once a chasm of mistrust and misunderstanding, was now bridged by a shared, heartbreaking truth. The next day was the formal meeting with my in-laws and their lawyers. We sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table in a sterile downtown law office. Robert and Carol Vance sat opposite us, their faces grim, their lawyers flanking them like sentinels. Their lead attorney began, his voice dripping with condescending pity, outlining their case for my incompetence and Julian's predatory nature. I let him speak. I listened to every accusation, every thinly veiled insult. When he was finished, a smug, expectant silence filled the room. All eyes turned to Julian, expecting him to counter with a barrage of financial data and legal threats. But Julian didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the spreadsheets he had prepared. He looked directly at Mark's parents. Robert, Carol, he said, his voice quiet but resonant, filling the cavernous room. Before my attorneys respond, I would like to say something. Mark Vance was my best friend. The shock on their faces was palpable. He then told them the story, the dorm room, the shared dreams, the bitter falling out. He told them of his regret, of the 20 years of silence that he could never take back. Then he slid Mark's letter across the table. Mark wrote this a few weeks before he passed, he said gently. I think he would want you to read it. Robert picked it up with a trembling hand. As he and Carol read, I watched their faces transform. The anger, the suspicion, the self-righteous certainty, it all melted away, replaced by a wave of raw, uncomprehending grief. They weren't just reading a letter, they were hearing their son's voice one last time. By the end, Carol was sobbing quietly into a handkerchief, and Robert's face was ashen. The legal posturing had been stripped away, leaving only the raw human tragedy of their loss. Julian let the moment settle. Then he addressed their lawyer, his voice once again sharp, precise, and utterly in command. As for the financial health of Vance Designs, he said, pushing a thick binder across the table, you will find a complete prospectus inside. You will see that all debts have been cleared. You will also find legally binding documents signed by me, establishing a new operational trust. I am personally funding the firm's recovery and a 5-year expansion plan. I am converting my controlling shares into a co-ownership trust with Mrs. Vance, legally binding my future to the success of this firm and making any hostile takeover impossible. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of their legal team. I am not here to acquire a company. I am here to honor a legacy. Your son asked me to protect his family and his life's work. Any attempt to interfere with that promise will be met with the full and inexhaustible resources of my personal legal team. Are we clear? The silence that followed was absolute. The fight was over. Their case, built on a foundation of suspicion and fear, had collapsed under the weight of a truth they could not possibly fight. They hadn't just lost a legal battle. They had been given a final, unexpected gift from their son. An explanation. A sense of peace. The meeting was adjourned. We left the law office and stepped out into the crisp Seattle air. The sky, for the first time in what felt like months, was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The tension that had been a permanent knot in my shoulders had finally dissolved, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet relief. Robert and Carol Vance stood on the sidewalk a few feet away, looking lost and small against the towering glass and steel of the city. Their lawyers had already scurried away, their purpose rendered obsolete. For a long moment, we all just stood there, separated by an awkward, grief-stricken silence. It was Carol who moved first. She walked over to me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. The hardness, the accusatory glint that had wounded me so deeply, was gone. In its place was just a mother's sorrow. "Eleanor," she said, her voice fragile. We are so sorry. We were wrong. We were just so angry, so lost. We thought we were protecting him." She reached out and took my hands, her grip surprisingly firm. Mark was always a better judge of character than we were. He saw the good in people. He saw it in you. And he saw it in you, Julian. She turned to him, a flicker of the old warm Carol I had known returning to her eyes. "Thank you for honoring our son." Robert came and stood beside her, his face a mask of regret. He just nodded, unable to speak, and placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. There was no grand scene of forgiveness, no dramatic reconciliation. There was just a quiet, shared understanding, a truce born from a shared love for the man who had connected all of our broken lives. We parted ways on that street corner, not as adversaries but as fellow survivors of the same shipwreck, each of us finding our own way back to shore. The weeks that followed were different. The legal threat was gone, and with the truth of Julian's presence now laid bare between us, the dynamic in the office shifted. The professional tension was replaced by a quiet, comfortable partnership. We were no longer just a widow and a CEO. We were Eleanor and Julian, two people bound by a shared purpose. He still worked with the same relentless efficiency, but now I understood the engine that drove him. It wasn't just ambition, it was a promise. He was building a fortress around Mark's legacy, not just with money but with his time, his genius, and his unwavering dedication. He never spoke of the letter again, and I never brought it up. It was a sacred, silent understanding between us, but the change in him was palpable. The hollow look in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a focus that felt less like a defense mechanism and more like a genuine passion. He started to smile. Small, rare things that would appear for a fleeting moment, when Leo would show him a particularly ambitious Lego creation, or when a design for a new project finally clicked into place. I started bringing in an extra coffee for him in the mornings, and he started staying late not just to work, but to help me sort through the endless paperwork that still felt overwhelming. We found a rhythm, a seamless collaboration that felt as natural and intuitive as if we'd been working together for years. In a way, I suppose we had. We were completing a conversation that Mark and Julian had started in a dorm room 2 decades ago. The real transformation, however, was in our children. With the constant tension gone from the adults' world, Leo and Maya blossomed. The office became their second home, their shared kingdom. They would sit for hours in their corner, Leo's boisterous energy tempered by Maya's quiet calm. They would build entire cities out of Lego, complete with parks and community centers, their designs often more imaginative and compassionate than our own. One afternoon I overheard Leo explaining Mark to Maya. "My daddy was a builder," he said, holding up a picture of Mark. "He made houses for people to be happy in. He's on a long trip now, building houses in the stars." Maya, who rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, looked at the picture and then at Leo. "My mommy is on a long trip too," she said softly. It was the first time either of them had mentioned their missing parent to the other. It wasn't a moment of sadness, but one of profound, simple connection. They understood each other on a level no one else could. Life began to feel normal again. Not the old normal, the one that had been shattered and could never be perfectly pieced back together, but a new normal, a different shape of family, a different rhythm of life. The constant, crushing weight of grief and fear began to lift, and for the first time in over a year I felt the stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. The Northgate Community Centre, the project that had once been the symbol of my failure, became the symbol of our new beginning. Julian had not only secured the funding, he had become deeply, personally invested in it. He would walk the construction site with me, his expensive suit often smudged with sawdust, pointing out structural efficiencies and suggesting improvements to the design. He listened to my ideas, to Mark's ideas, and built upon them, strengthening them with his own brand of pragmatic brilliance. He never tried to erase Mark's vision. He only sought to make it stronger, more enduring. The grand opening was on a sunny Saturday in late autumn. The entire neighborhood turned out. The building was magnificent, a testament to everything Mark had believed in. It was filled with light and laughter, the sound of children playing in the new daycare, the quiet hum of people reading in the library. I gave a short speech, my voice thick with emotion, thanking the community, the team, and finally, Julian. He stood at the back of the crowd, Maya perched on his shoulders, and for the first time he let himself be seen. He didn't try to hide in the shadows of his corporate persona. He just stood there, a father and a friend, watching a shared dream come to life. As I finished, his eyes met mine across the crowded room, and he gave me one of his rare, genuine smiles. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, and in that moment I realized my heart had finally, truly started to heal. The story doesn't end with a grand romance, a dramatic kiss in the rain. It ends with something quieter, something more real. A few weeks after the opening, on a lazy Sunday afternoon, the four of us were in the backyard of my house. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass and the sound of Leo and Maya's laughter as they chased each other around the old oak tree. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the lawn. Julian was on his knees in the grass, his suit jacket slung over a patio chair, his tie loosened. He was patiently helping Leo fix the chain on his bicycle, his large, capable hands carefully manipulating the greasy links. He wasn't Julian Croft, the tech titan. He was just Julian, a dad fixing a bike. I watched them from the porch, a mug of tea warming my hands. A feeling of profound peace settled over me, a quiet contentment that had been absent from my life for so long. This was it. This was the home Mark had written about. It wasn't the one he had left, but it was the one that had grown from its foundations. It was different, rebuilt with new materials, a new design, but the soul of it, the love that held it all together, was the same. I walked over and knelt beside them in the grass. "Here," I said, handing him a wrench from the toolbox. "You might need this." Our fingers brushed as he took it from me. It was a simple, undramatic touch, a fleeting connection that sent a small, unexpected spark through me. It wasn't a spark of passionate romance, but something deeper, warmer. It was the spark of partnership, of shared purpose, of a future being built not on a business contract or a dying man's wish, but on the beautiful, complicated, and resilient architecture of a family being remade. He looked up at me, his eyes the color of a calm sea after a storm, and he smiled. And I smiled back. We didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I knew we would build it together. Every life is a structure, built on a foundation of love and loss, of triumphs and failures. Sometimes the walls collapse, the roof caves in, and we are left standing in the ruins, believing nothing can ever be rebuilt. But this story, the story of a lonely CEO and a grieving widow, is a reminder that the most beautiful designs are often born from the most broken places. It teaches us that a true legacy isn't just about what we build, but about who we empower to build after we're gone. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most strategic business decision is an act of love, and the greatest investment we can ever make is in each other. Here, our mission is to share these powerful stories of human connection, to remind you that even in the darkest of times, there is always a blueprint for a new beginning. If this story touched your heart and gave you a little bit of hope, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need it, and subscribing to our channel for more tales that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Because in the end, we are all architects of our own lives, and together we can build something truly beautiful.